Welcome back to Over 40 and Fabulous, and today we're going to talk about being real. And it's a subject that is thrown around loosely, and often people don't actually know what it means because we talk about the word fake, and often it's related to goods that are not authentically created and have been imported for a cheaper rate with slave labor involved, and so people say rather buy the real deal. But what does it mean when it is relating to a person? So I can talk from a place of experience, which is often what you want to hear. It's not textbook written by someone for you to study. And my realness is something that has definitely evolved over time. And my lack of authenticity has in fact brought me a lot of personal pain. And so it's from that stance that I'm going to share with you my understanding of authenticity. So as children, often there are things that happen which bring us huge amounts of pain, and we don't really know at the time that we are trying to develop coping mechanisms in order to help us through those difficult experiences. So for me, there were elements before the age of 6 actually that were things I was exposed to that a child that young should never ever have observed. And it was related to my nanny, who was my primary caregiver, and it was really, really traumatic both for her and for myself. And in that space, I, through a protective nature and through some bribery and blackmail from the persecutor of this amazing, incredible woman, was that I needed to not expose what was going on. So the level of pressure that was put onto me, and with that responsibility came a huge amount of unnatural survival. Unnatural in the sense that I could not just be a little girl. I had to cover up my real feelings, my real emotions, because what I would have wanted to do to protect her from what was happening to her and to expose this man for his absolute awful, derogatory persecution of an innocent woman was to go and tell, because that's what kids do. But when you're being threatened that that person is going to send this woman off in the past bans, which in the 70s in South Africa were very, very real, if a worker did not have proper papers, they would be removed by the police. And no one ever knew what happened to them. And so in my little world, as a child, 3-4 years old, I would have done anything to not have that happen, because I'd witnessed those yellow vans coming and my friends and neighbors, workers being carted off. So it's not a real nice thing to happen to a little child. And I developed coping mechanisms, which was comfort eating, and went on to layer on top of that all kinds of different things. But the main point I want to land first is I developed a fake smile. The smile was one of composure. I'm okay. Everything's okay. How are you today? No, I'm fine, thank you. And I carried this for different reasons over different experiences up until perhaps the last year or so, where the layers of onion peels had slowly but surely started exposing not just to the world, but to me, who I actually was, who I was created to be, what my purpose really was, and the authenticity behind that. What were actually the desires of my heart? Because it was as if I had been robbed, not just as a little girl of being a little girl, but of dreams that could have evolved had I been allowed to just be real and play and nurture my creative talents and the desires of, in those days, wanting to be an actress and be on TV and, of course, be famous when you look at your heroes and your role models as you grow older. And I want to be like her, and I want to sing, and I want to dance, and I want to be in movies. But from having to close in expression of the truest, most authentic nature meant when it came to acting and performing, there always was a fakeness around it. And I'll give you an example. In 2002, I did a TV presenting course, so it was easy for me to sit in front of the camera and to talk about what's coming up like a continuity presenter, or talk about a topic that was going to be discussed or debated. But when it came to acting in a role, I was way too animated and over the top in my performance. There was not an element of, this is a person who is whatever. So take Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman. She played a prostitute and she played it with a certain amount of humor. She had her beautiful way about her, quite quirky, but she stood up for who she was, and there was never this element of trying to be anything more or less. So when she was challenged based on the way she was dressed by some snooty woman inside one of those Rodeo Drive boutiques, she looked quite offended, because she had her value centered in something that was quite real, and she was not going to be snubbed by that sort of pretentiousness. If you don't have that anchor sorted out from a young age, you will be wobbled and deterred and even smashed and burned in a space when confrontation hits. So for me, I just developed layer upon layer upon layer of protective falseness. And this is not for me to stand here and to be derogatory about who I was. This is to help people who are in that same space to go, okay, gee, I can relate to that. Whatever their experience was of what happened at a young age, or perhaps even at adolescence or into being a teenager, they can start relating to some of their coping mechanisms, which led to very unhealthy habits. And from a place of brokenness, we make very, very unhealthy choices. And so by the age of 38, when I landed up in rehab, and I wasn't an excessive drinker and I wasn't an excessive drug user, I had played around. I was a binge drinker, a party girl. So if there was a party to be had, I was in there, and I could certainly pack away huge amounts of alcohol, far more than my size you would think would allow, and maintain a level of coping until I all fell apart and passed out. But it was excessive and it was entertaining, and for the people I hung out with, they enjoyed my humor and my quirkiness in that space. But that was when potentially the real me started coming out. But in a normal sober state, I was very composed, very controlled. I was head girl in primary school and high school, and I was an academic and had colors in various school sports, and an accoladed dancer with huge amounts of trophies and different medals that I'd won over the years. I was valedictorian. I was Miss Durban in 1994, and so you started seeing elements of success. However, deep down inside of me was just a boiling frustration, an anger, a resentment, a blame, a guilt, a real poison that needed to explode. So comfort eating started from really young, from literally the age of 3. With that came such a massive responsibility, because as a dancer and a sportswoman and a model and a beauty queen, I needed to look a certain way, but I could not do anything with the food that I ingested unless I got it out of my system. So from the age of 16, when my body started filling out as I started becoming a young woman, panic set in, and it started the onset of 16 to 18 years of bulimia. So by the age of 34, I put down this unhealthy, dishonest way of living, and I said, right, I'm going to live with the consequences. If I put something in my body, it stays there. And I went through the very uncomfortable process of putting on weight. It was about 17 kilos actually, and I even had people comment. It happened while I was living overseas for a year. So on returning to South Africa, it was starkly obvious that something was not okay, and I was teased, I was ridiculed. I had a lot of discomfort around people saying, geez, what happened to you? You look like you've put on about 10 kgs. And I could say, actually it's 17 kgs, and I'm the only woman who can't wait to get back to my pre-baby weight, but I haven't had a baby. And I'd even been learning maternity wear to cover up this bloated stomach from all the successive eating, and of course the puffiness, etc., from just unhealthy levels of fat and sugar. It was hugely humiliating, and of course people just don't know how to be discerning and respectful. I clearly had a problem that was surely centered in a place of darkness and brokenness. It wouldn't be by choice that I'd go from someone who was on TV for many, many years. I danced on SABC for 8 years on Vili Vali. This is going back into the 70s. As I say, I was a beauty queen. I'd won multiple pageants. I'd done about 8 television commercials in my teens, and then in my 30s even I was still doing television commercials. And now at the age of 35 I come back from overseas and I'm not looking like the person people came to know, but that would have actually been the first breaking open of some element of realness, because you can't hide an eating or overeating disorder, which became a bulimic eating disorder, forever. Something's going to give. So now my, call it great composed public composure, was now compromised. I was looking extremely unhealthy. So because there was no fixing or psychology or psychiatry or counsel or any sort of inner work, I just redirected and I started trying to eat better, exercising a little bit more. But then the drug scene was exposed to me, the whole rave scene, and so that was far easier, because sometimes you wouldn't eat for 2 to 3 days when drugs were in your system, and of course dancing all night and exercising before and after in the gym or running or walking, etc. There was a maintenance of a fairly slim figure that I could hold together, but it was not real. And I used to really, really get sensitive to people who instantly didn't like me, and I didn't know why. And now in retrospect I can look back, and some people have got a far greater awareness or discernment around somebody who's not authentic. They might not necessarily know how to express it, but what they will show you is that they just don't like you. And I'd become excessively needy to try and find out how I could impress that person. And of course, from that place of desperation, you become even more unlikable. So with that comes the rejection, and now you're already broken as I was. This is now going into my mid to late 30s. It's over 30 years of me hiding the original brokenness that has just now had layers put on top of it, because I would have had multiple romances that went on to be relationships. I'd even got married and divorced in that space, and with each breakup of the next relationship came more brokenness and more resentment and more insecurity, and my self-esteem went from hardly anything to 0 to minus. And there was a 7-year space of constantly thinking about suicide, obsessing about it in fact, but never truly going through with it for numerous reasons. And one of them I can share is that, and it sounds dark and it sounds, wow, that's a little bit of an overshare, but I never ever lived in a place that had a garage. And I had, through all the research I'd done, itemized that as that would probably be the easiest way to go, because what I did not want to happen is to slash my wrists or my neck or an artery in my leg, or to jump off a building and land up with multiple injuries, multiple broken bones, multiple scars, and then actually not die. Therefore, I now am living with the obvious trauma that was going on the inside now expressed on the outside. So with that comes even greater failure, greater self-hatred and loathing, and so of course the pain just gets bigger. It's more fuel onto that wound. It's acid actually being thrown onto that wound. And again, not being in a space where it was easy for me to reach out for help. And although all of this was going on, some very unhealthy behaviors, I wasn't living near family or people that were close enough to care about me or to call me on it. And so there was this underlying darkness. It was almost like living a double life. And whilst there's this element of I'm getting away with this, I was successful in my career, I was a shareholder and director by the age of before my 28th birthday, in fact, in an ad agency, there was a lot of trouble bubbling and boiling below the surface. So fast forward to my 38th birthday, I am now 3 months on in rehab. And you know what? That's the next layer of unauthenticity coming off, because who would have expected that to happen to me? And with it came a lot of shock, a lot of horror, a lot of pressure and almost judgment of how could this have happened to you. And some people don't know how to process, well, wow, at least she's getting help. It's easier to look on it as, what have you actually done? And no one, unless they've been there, can fully understand. But what I had done is I had finally put up my hand and said, I'm not coping. And it was not with kicking and screaming. I was done. By that stage, I'd been in a domestic violent relationship for a year. I had had a protection order. It wasn't working. There was still a lot of crazy stuff going on. I'd had a new relationship, and we had flown down to Durban to escape the Johannesburg rat race and to put him into rehab. And by a series of events, I landed up going to one a few hundred kilometers up the coast. And finally, I thought I was going to be able to breathe. But coming into recovery from all of that, now think about it, 35 years of brokenness, from 3 to 38. There's going to be a lot of sore, uncomfortable processing that needs to happen in order for someone to get well. People just think it's overnight and there's a magic wand. But I took it on, and I was willing to do whatever it took to just be better. And so I started a 12-step program, and I went to various different groups, and it didn't matter, actually, to be honest, and it's something for people to understand. It doesn't matter whether you're in Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Eating Disorder Anonymous. The principle is the same. You're coming from a foundation of fear. Doesn't matter how you got there. No one's competing. No one's story is better or worse. Your reality is that you had some brokenness that happened, and your perfect little soul was fissured, and you would have been putting something into that crack to help try and heal the soul. The problem is with life challenges, more hurt, more brokenness, some death, some failure. That hole becomes bigger. So the need, look at it, it looks like a monster's jaws. The need and the craving and the hunger, whether it be for food or pornography or for gambling or for drugs or alcohol, becomes greater. And that's why addiction is a progressive disease. You just want more and more and more. And phrases like one is too many, 1,000 is never enough are thrown around, because it is never enough. An addict never goes, sure, I have had enough. I feel so whole, I feel so complete, I feel satisfied. No, even if you pass out, you wake up and you're going, sure, bit of a hangover, it could be a food hangover, it could be a shame hangover, and I'll never do that again until someone comes with, hey, would you like to come to this party? Here's a chocolate cake. What would you like to do this weekend? And you're sort of forgetting that pain that you've just endured, because there's still this brokenness that needs to be fed. And in my experience, just to close off on this fakeness, because there's several series that I'll do on this, is that I, for 6.5 years, did the 12-step program, but still I had this composure mask of, I'm okay, everything's okay, I am doing fine, until a really, really, let's call it earth-shattering experience happened, and I was hijacked by 5 men with guns whilst I was with a friend, and I experienced multiple injuries in that space. I had a broken wrist, a broken arm, a head injury, and there was a sexual assault that followed, not by the hijackers, but actually in the hospital with a night nurse. And you would have thought that that would have been something that would have instantly broken me open. But I spent the next 6 months still holding it together, until one day I was sitting at Westville Prison, where I was running a workshop I'd been running for 2 years through Narcotics Anonymous with the inmates, the female inmates, and I was sharing, and suddenly this mask of composure fell off and I started crying. And in that space, an unraveling started. And so a week later, when I was sharing for my 6-year recovery milestone, I shared mostly through a quivering lip, some tears, and some realness that people had never experienced. And after that, people actually came up to me and they were saying, hello Aldine, pleased to meet you. And that would have been 6 years ago, because I'm now 12 years in recovery almost. And so for the past 6 years, I've been taken on another journey, and it's an even more exciting one, with more layers that have been peeled away to bring me to where I am today, a level of authenticity that I can honestly say is something that I don't think anyone can just literally get to overnight. It involves a lot of commitment and desire just to be better, which is why I say hashtag just be better, because it is possible, but you need to want it. So please stay tuned, and I'll continue with the story next week. Hi, this is Aldine Dallas from Over 40 and Fabulous. And last week you would have heard from me how I personally went through quite a lot of childhood trauma, which brought me into a place of living a life that was unauthentic. And it's not an easy life to live, because you're constantly trying to put on different masks to show people that you are okay. That was my experience, is that I needed to be okay.